Three, two, one. Hello, I'm Derek Arden and welcome to Monday Night Live. Today we've got Carolyn Metkola on from Albania and also Tony Woodall, who I first met at the Golden Gate Breakfast Club in San Francisco a number of years ago. I'm going to hand you over to Tony, who's going to introduce Carolyn. Tony, are you there?
I am here. Thank you so much. And thank you, Carolyn, for visiting us and sharing the information today. I love walking Caminos, as most of you know, and learning about world and European history. I moved to Albania because of its central location in Europe, as well as its own long history. Derek mentioned in one of our meetings that I should speak about Albania. Well, I'm not the person to do that, but I knew who would be. So I wanted to invite Carolyn. So I met Carolyn at one of our expat meetings here in Durrës, Albania, and learned about her extensive history in museums and archaeology and all the work that she's done in Albania. So I asked Derek to invite her to talk to us about Albania. So I'm going to hand it back over to Derek to chat with Carolyn, and Carolyn will give us a little bit of her background and everything in that subject. So.
Thanks very much, Tony. That's great. And thank you for talking to people in bars like Carolyn and persuading them to come on Monday Night Live, because I know you meet most people in bars in Albania. Carolyn, welcome to Monday Night Live. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of the things you've learned over the last few years. Carolyn, tell us your backstory and how you got involved in Albania and museums.
Well, thank you very much, Derek, and thank you, Tony. And yes, it was indeed in a bar. I have to fess up. That was where we met. So I have been living in Albania now for just over 8 years, but I've been coming here since 2008 because one of the things that I do, as you rightly point out, I've got big involvement with museums, is that I bring people on cultural heritage tours, not only to Albania, but in the past, I started with Greece, actually, when I was working at the British Museum, because the idea was, when working at the British Museum, to unite some of the objects there with the places that they came from. So the idea was you could go and see the objects in the museum, and then you could go and visit the country they came from. So I started in Greece. I worked in a lot of countries taking tours that unfortunately I can't go to anymore. Saudi Arabia you could go to, but not at the moment. Syria, Iran. But my mainstay has really been Greece and then Albania. So once I came to Albania, I fell in love with the country. And I've been really lucky in that since I've been here, I've been able to get involved with all kinds of different cultural activities, working with the British Embassy on those kinds of things, but also doing some archaeology here. So that's really wonderful for me because, as I said, I'm an archaeologist as well. So my background really is in museums, education. I was a primary school teacher, I was a university teacher, I was a museum educator, and also the archaeological experience. So I'm a very lucky person.
And we're very lucky to have you on. And you're going to educate us now about Albania and show us some of the history, I think, on your slideshow.
I will. Are you happy for me to share now?
Yep, go for it.
Shqipëria, that's that strange word at the beginning of that title there. Shqipëria is actually what the Albanians call Albania. So the Albanians call themselves Shqiptar, and their language is Shqip, and Shqipëria is means the land of the eagles. But we know the country as Albania. And as you can see, it's a land with really beautiful landscapes, and you're never far from a mountain in Albania. Wherever you are, you can turn around and you will see hills in the background. So it's a very beautiful country, but a country that perhaps isn't as well known as many other countries that are slap bang in the middle of the Mediterranean. And there's quite a good reason for that. And that's really because Albania was cut off for quite a long period because it was a very repressive communist regime from after the Second World War all the way to 1991. And it was such a repressive regime that they used to say it was the only country that you could get shot trying to get in and shot trying to get out. So it really was closed off. So now the country is opening up more, and I'm sure you've seen in the newspapers and the travel magazines, everybody saying that Albania is a good destination to go to. And it certainly is, but it's got a really interesting and important history. So I wanted to share with you some of the aspects of that history. And then, as Derek said, I can meet you all at the airport when you come on the trip. So we've got to start with the map here. Now, I've given you two maps of Albania, and the reason why is that I wanted to show you how mountainous the land is, but also I wanted to show you a good border, and the map on the left, although it shows us very nicely the contours of the land, doesn't show us a good border. So that's why you have the one on the right too. And you can see those surrounding countries there. You've got Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia, and then Greece. And then opposite, you can just see actually on the right-hand map, you've got a little bit of the heel of Italy just there. That's Italy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And actually, down here, we're missing something because we're missing Corfu. If you look on the left-hand map, you can see Corfu there. So you can see how close actually Corfu is to Albania. And just with any other country, really, the geography is key because you've got a sort of backbone of mountains, and then you've got those river valleys. So you can see here, we've got this major river valley there. We've got another one down here, the Vjosa, that goes right into Greece. And then we've got this one here, the Shkumbin River. That's really important. That sort of divides Albania in two. And why these are important is because these are the pathways, these river valleys are the pathways from the Adriatic to the interior. And this explains a lot of Albania's history because the Romans wanted Albania because they wanted to get their troops from Italy to the east. And then the conquering Ottomans, the Muslims, wanted to get from the east to the west and cross over to Italy. And lots of other peoples did as well. Too many to mention, but this is the key to understanding the history of Albania, this geography. So Albania was inhabited in ancient times by a people called the Illyrians. Now, I think that quite a few of you will have heard of Shakespeare's play, Twelfth Night, and it's set in Illyria. And I think that Shakespeare was on pretty good ground setting his play in Illyria because he could say anything he wanted and have any kind of scenes he wanted, and nobody would know anything because we don't know very much about the Illyrians. We don't know who really they were to a great degree because they didn't write anything down. So when we find out about them from texts, we find out about them from the Greeks, who thought that anybody who didn't speak Greek was a barbarian, and they spoke Illyrian. And we hear about them from the Romans, and the Romans used them, as the Greeks did, for mercenaries because they were great fighters. So we know from the texts that they were great fighters. And we know that from the archaeology as well. This is where these two things come together, because look at the wonderful armor that's been excavated. And there's lots of examples of this around Albania in the museums. The helmet on the right, imagine wearing that helmet, how heavy that must be. You'd have a great horsehair plume on the top of it. And then when you advanced into battle, you imagine that metal over your ears. It would be very disorienting to be sort of cut off from the sounds of the battle in that way. And you would be carrying a huge shield. And the shield on the left has been painstakingly restored. I put a little feature, little detail for you there, because I wanted to show you this wonderful Medusa head with the tongue sticking out. So the tongue sticking out is to frighten and ward off the enemy. So it's basically saying up yours, actually, but in a sort of politer way by the tongue sticking out. But you can see from that little picture how the archaeology, the conservators must have, well, actually, it took years to put this shield together. So they were great mercenaries. And what else do we know about them? Well, they were great builders. So they knew how to build a wall. Look at that wall there. That's I've sat on that block in the picture on the left so that you get some idea of the scale. It's much better than a rod to have me sitting on it. So that is a huge block of stone. Those blocks of stones were cut from local limestone. They had these cities on the top of hills overlooking those river valley routes. And the blocks would be brought to the wall, and then they would be finished actually at the wall itself, so that you could get those very, very neat joins there that you can see on the right. No mortar, no cement, just the stone fitting together. And the reason why they have these sort of little offsets here is that Albania is prone to earthquakes. So if you have those little offsets, when you have an earthquake, the stones won't slide, they will stop. So that's an anti-seismic device. So the Illyrians were a sort of tribal people, but they started to settle in these cities in around the 4th century BC. So that's a city there called Bullis, which is an Illyrian city overlooking a beautiful river valley that you can see there in the background. So I mentioned that they were good warriors, that they were used as mercenaries, and that they were also sort of looked down on by the Greeks and the Romans because they were barbarians and they didn't speak Greek, they spoke Illyrian. And here we've got a Greek writer talking about the Illyrians, and he tells us the Illyrians eat and drink in a sitting position. Well, that's normal, but of course it wasn't to the Greeks and Romans. They liked to recline when they were eating and drinking. But it's pretty sensible to me. The aristocrats drank every day, getting drunk and having feasts and not controlling themselves when it comes to the work of eating and drinking. Now, that might sound a bit, I don't know, trying to be a little bit negative there. But actually, these guys were connoisseurs. We know from the amphora, the terracotta containers that we find in all the archaeological sites, that they were actually importing wine from all around the Mediterranean, and all the best places for wine they had trade with. And you can see here on this left picture here, it's the grave of a warrior. We know that because he's got his helmet there. But look what he's got. He's got a little filter, a little sieve here, so that the dregs don't go into his cup. He's got different types of wine cups, several of them. And the picture on the right is an imported wine jug. It's imported from Greece, and it shows on the side a picture of the goddess Athena pouring some wine for the hero Heracles. So they loved their wine. And also, I have to give them due here. They had a very what the Greeks considered a bit scandalous, really, that because they let their women go to banquets, and the Greeks didn't do that. The Greeks, it's a no-no for women to go to banquets in ancient Greece. So, but the Greek writer Theopompus said that the reason why they let the women go to the banquets was so that they could carry the drunk men home. I think there's a little bit of propaganda there, but anyway. So the rather strange map here, and I do apologize that it's not terribly clear to see. I have rotated the Mediterranean for you. Now, the reason why I've done this is that if you see Albania here, so you've got Albania there, you've got Greece here, you've got Italy here, And I wanted to do this to show you there's Albania, look, Greece here, Italy here. How important a route Albania was in ancient times. So we've got the Illyrians, who I've already mentioned, who spoke Illyrian. And we have some people in the South Albania in an area called Epirus. They spoke Greek. But this route was incredibly important for trade and for travel. And you can see that if you're crossing the Mediterranean, you have to hug the shores. So if you're coming from Spain, you might be coming from Roman Spain. You've got to go around, maybe you can go through the Straits of Messina, but then you cross over straight away to Albania. So you can see, or Illyria, you can see why the Romans wanted it. But they also wanted it because it got lots of natural resources. It had got lots of bitumen, which they need for their boats. It's got good manpower. It's got good timber. It's got good silver. And the Illyrians themselves didn't have slaves, but both the Greeks and the Romans had slaves, and it became a major slave market there in the Roman period. So the Romans had their eyes on Illyria, and eventually they managed to get to be controlling it themselves as a protectorate, and then eventually it becomes a Roman colony. It becomes a protectorate for the Romans in the 3rd century BC. And in the 3rd century BC, the Romans upgrade a road that's already in existence that goes, this is that red line you can see on the map there. This road goes from Dyrrhachium, that's the city I live in nowadays, Durrës, so on the Adriatic, and it goes all the way across, all the way to Byzantium, which of course eventually becomes Constantinople and then becomes Istanbul. So this was an incredibly important route for the Romans because once they'd got hold of Albania, they wanted to conquer the east, and so they needed supply lines. So they built this road, which comes to be known as the Via Egnatia. That's the name of the proconsul, which is a Roman official who upgraded the road. It was an existing route, but he put on he made the road into a wonderful Roman road. So it's like, what did the Romans do for us? We all know they built good roads, and this is one of the most important ones. And on the left, you can see a stretch of that road. And I've actually driven down that. It's possible that in Albania, you can drive down an ancient Roman road, and it's quite a weird feeling to do so, but very, very special. And you can also walk along it. And I think Tony has actually walked along a stretch of the Via Egnatia. So, as I said, the Romans fought a series of wars, the Illyrian Wars, in order to make the area of Albania today into a province. The province of Illyricum was actually much bigger than Albania itself. It headed up into the north and the east of the territory that's now Albania. But the Romans it was a sort of special place to the Romans, Albania, and that's partly because Julius Caesar, he and Pompey fought out the Roman Civil War in and along the coast of Albania, from Durrës here, where I live, further to the south. And because of that, and because ultimately Julius Caesar becomes the victor of the Civil War, this had a special place. It was a special place to him. And it was also a place where he could settle some of his veterans. So both Julius Caesar and, of course, his successor, Augustus, settled Roman veterans here, but also wealthy Roman landowners wanted to come over and take advantage of the landscape and the resources that the area had. Now, what I'm showing you in this slide, and this is one of my favorite sites, this one on the left here, is the site of Apollonia. And Apollonia was a city that was an Illyrian city Then the Greeks came along and refounded the city, and they called it Apollonia after the god Apollo. And Julius Caesar sent his nephew, Octavian, to Apollonia to take part in some military exercises and also to attend the school of oratory there. And Octavian was in Apollonia when he had the news from Rome that Julius Caesar had been assassinated. And so he rushed back to Rome and became the next Caesar. So Octavian becomes Augustus. And it was here in Apollonia that he first heard that Caesar was assassinated. So he also gave special status to the city, didn't have to pay taxes, etc. And he settled some of his veterans here. And on the right, you see the city of Bilis. That's the one that I showed you before. You see that inscription? There's a Latin inscription there. And he's saying that Caesar, that's Augustus, gave it. He makes it a colony and he settles his veterans there. So as we move forward in history, we come to the Byzantine period. And the Byzantine period dates from 395 AD. Sorry about the dates here. And 395 AD was a time when there was a split in the church, with split between Rome and Byzantium, which becomes Constantinople. And the province that's Albania went to the eastern part. So it becomes part of the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire. And the images you have on the screen, first of all here, you have this wonderful manuscript, which is on, it's purple. The actual manuscript itself has been dyed purple and then has been written on with one of the Gospels. So this is a manuscript of the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. It's a page from there, dates to the 6th century AD. So it's one of the earliest Gospels. And there are two really early Gospels, these purple Gospels in Albania. And this shows, I think, the importance of this area at the time, to have two of them, because there are only 7 in existence. So this purple one is the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. That's just a page from them. And there's a 9th century one, which is all of the 4 Gospels. So, as I said, it was a really important place during the Byzantine period. The round object that you see at the top is a lead seal. It's very rare because it shows figures on it. And this is a seal of the family of the Byzantine emperor. And he'd sent his sons to Durrës, to Dyrrhachium. So you don't send your sons there unless it's an important place. But we still have lots to learn about these periods. And the reason why we have a lot to learn about these periods is that the archives have been closed for so long. So there's more and more study being done to help us find out about Albania during this sort of the Byzantine period between the Romans and the oncoming of the Ottomans. The beautiful church on the right, which you'll see there, look at that fantastic brickwork that you see. This church, see that beautiful drum there with the lovely designs all done in brick. This is a church that dates back to the 7th century and is said, some people think it dates back actually to the 6th century. It's said to be founded by the Emperor Justinian, and it held a piece of the true cross. So that's why it was such an important church. So again, showing the importance of this region at that time. Now, as we move forward in history, we come to the period of the Ottomans. So the Ottomans were the Muslim dynasty who extended their power into the Balkans from their base in Turkey in the 14th century. And by the 1380s, they were into Albania. the area that's Albania today. I have to keep doing that caveat because Albania's borders weren't set until 1912. So Albania is sort of shorthand for the area I'm talking about. So the Ottomans invaded and people converted to Islam. And previously, they had been either Catholic, largely in the north, or Orthodox in the south, because in 1054, there was the schism of the churches. And North Albania, north of that Shkumbin River, the one that divides the country in two, they were Catholics. And the ones who lived to the south of the river were meant to be Orthodox, which is quite a major thing to happen. And it's sort of, in a way, like some of the lines that were drawn in later centuries. This was a religious line rather than a political one, but obviously there's a great overlap there. So Catholic North, Orthodox South, and then as the Ottomans come in, we get conversions, so there are Muslims throughout the country. Now, you have on the screen there a bust of George Castriotti, that's his name, and he's generally known as Skanderbeg, or as you can see on that bust there, Skanderbeu. Beo means Lord, so he's Lord Alexander, and he's Albania's national hero. But in fact, when he was a young man, he was son of one of the noble families in Albania, and he and his brother were sent off to the Turkish court, to the Sultan's administration, converted to Islam. They were Catholics before, and he was a very good soldier. He went into the Ottoman army and he became a very, very good fighter and commander. And that's why the Turks gave him the nickname Lord Alexander, like Alexander the Great, the famous general. But in 1442, he actually decides, following the Battle of Niš between the coalition of Christian forces and the Ottomans, that he's defecting. And he comes back to Albania. He goes to his citadel at Kruja that had been taken from him by the Ottomans, and he raises his flag and he says, we are going to fight against the Ottomans. We are not going to succumb to the Turks and to Islam. We are going to fight. And for about 25 years, he led the Albanians, not all of them by any means, but a good part of them, against the Ottomans, and pinned down the Ottomans in Albania. And the Ottomans had wanted to cross over to Italy. That was the route they wanted to choose. That's why they wanted Albania. But Skanderbeg pinned them down and fought them in pitched battles, in ambushes, in night fights, all sorts of different tactics. A really, truly brilliant general and diplomat. And finally, when Skanderbeg died, the Ottoman Sultan did actually cross over to Italy, and he took the city of Otranto. But he had to leave there because of some trouble in the Mediterranean elsewhere. And then he died. And the next sultan, Sultan Bayezid, was not an expansionist sultan. He wanted the border of the empire to be at the Adriatic. And so Italy was saved, as it were. So Skanderbeg is a truly towering figure because for 25 years, he pinned the Ottomans down and stopped them from crossing to Italy. And for that, 4 different popes named him Athlete of Christ. So he's somebody that perhaps we should know a little bit more about. But as I say, because Albania has been closed off, we don't really hear very much about him. Ultimately, you could say he wasn't successful because the Ottomans were in Albania until 1912. And it cost the country a lot in men and in land that was laid waste. But he was a great soldier and tactician. So life under the Ottomans. Albania's got several World Heritage sites, and you can see a picture on the left there of Berat, the city of 1,000 windows, or 1,001 windows there. That's traditional Ottoman architecture, and on the top right, you can see also a beautiful interior with its traditional Ottoman designs there. That's in Gjirokastër. So lots of people converted to Islam, but you didn't have to. You could stay being a Christian, you could stay being a Jew, but you were treated differently. You paid higher taxes, and you were treated differently in courts. You were not able to wear the color green because that was the color of the Prophet. So there are all sorts of restrictions on your life. And while we have beautiful religious buildings, beautiful mosques that were being built, and actually this picture here is the ceiling of a beautiful tekke, which is the place of worship of a sect of Islam, the Helvetes. You have beautiful Muslim religious buildings, but if you wanted to build a church, you couldn't build a new one, but you could build on top of an older church, but you had to keep it very plain and simple. So if you look at that building at the bottom right there, it looks like an ordinary house. Oops, sorry. It looks like an ordinary house, but it in fact is a church. And you couldn't have a steeple either, and it just had to be very plain. You weren't supposed to be tempted away from Islam by any beautiful churches. So, Albanian independence. Finally, after those hundreds of years, Albania becomes independent in November 1912. It was a long, hard battle because the Ottoman rulers had a divide and rule policy. They divided people up into administrative centers, administrative units called millets, which meant that the Christians were in one, the Jews were in another, the Muslims were in one. So it was very difficult to create a national identity. And furthermore, the Catholics would write in Latin. The Greeks were using the Latin alphabet. The Greeks would write using the Greek alphabet, and the Muslims were writing using Arabic script, but Turkish language. So there was no coherence bringing people together. But during the 19th century, there was a period of the national awakening, and eventually the Albanians managed to come together. They formed something called the Prizren League. Prizren is now in Kosovo. You can see actually Prizren on the map there. And they mustered some soldiers to try and counteract the threats that they were receiving from Montenegro and from other areas such as Greece as the power of the Ottomans declined. And when it was clear before the First World War, when we have the Balkan Wars, when the great powers could see that the Ottoman Empire was crumbling, and Albania was important because it is a key to the Adriatic. So once again, it's of strategic geographical importance. And in this case, the powers like Austro-Hungary and Italy and Britain were concerned that Russia, via Serbia, would get access to the Mediterranean. And so eventually, when Albanian independence, the Albanians declare it themselves first on the 28th of November 1912. And of course, it has to be eventually ratified by the great powers, and it is ratified, but it's really ratified because the great powers were worried that the country would be partitioned, with the north going to Montenegro, the south going to Greece, and perhaps Russia getting access to the Mediterranean via Serbia. So eventually, the the borders of Albania were drawn up. Here we have the border of Albania. And that's the orange here, the darker orange, not the darkest one, is the border of Albania. But if you look at that outer line there, the people within that line considered themselves to be Albanian, or many of them, and spoke Albanian. So when the Albanian borders were drawn up, about 50% of the people who considered themselves Albanian were outside those borders.
Wow.
So that's the tragedy of Albania, really. So moving quickly on, I know we have quite a lot of British people here. I thought I'd just mention very quickly the British connection in World War II. Now, a lot of people are aware of the Special Operations Executive that operated in Albania, both in the north of Albania, and you can see up here, that's a picture of one of the drop sites where gold and guns and other supplies were dropped for the Special Operations Executives to give to the locals to fight the Germans. And here in the south, we have a bay called Grammar Bay because it's got lots of ancient inscriptions on it. This was a bay that was identified by SOE operative Anthony Quayle, the famous actor who was serving in Albania with the SOE, as a place that supplies could be dropped from Italy. So as well as the SOE operations, there were two other operations that the British took part in. And one was earlier in the war, was after the Italians, in fact, invaded Albania, and they were pressing down towards Greece. So the British supplied aerial support. And the grave that you see on the left is a grave to Harry Sykes, who was shot down in a dogfight with an Italian near the Greek border. So November before last, we went down there, cleaned his grave, and left the wreath there for him. This is with a friend of mine, Richard Bone, who is the Commonwealth War Graves representative for Albania, who has lots of wonderful information about about the campaigns there, because there are still many airmen missing in Albania whose graves have not yet been discovered, unfortunately. And there was also an assault. The third operation was an assault on a city in the south, city of Saranda and nearby Himara. So unfortunately, servicemen from all three campaigns, some are buried in Tirana, in the cemetery there, but unfortunately some are still missing. After the war, we had the period of communism in Albania from 1946 to 1991. I have to say that some of the special operations people, Smiley and McLean, who were up in the north, warned actually the authorities in Britain that Enver Hoxha, who was the head of the partisans in the south, Enver Hoxha was likely to take over, and he was known to be a communist. He was likely to take over after the Second World War because he was very well organized. His partisans were very well organized, much more organized than the ones in the north. They, of course, were right. So it's a very repressive regime. First, the country was allied with Russia, but they broke with Russia in 1960. Then they were allied with China, broke with them in 1978. In 1985, Enver Hoxha, the dictator, died. And after that, 1990, people started to protest and to seek asylum in embassies. And in 1991, in February, the statue of Enver Hoxha was toppled and the regime fell. And in 1992, they had their elections. Enver Hoxha actually is in this sort of rogues gallery. You can see his bust down there with the other people that used to be regularly displayed around the cities and towns of Albania. So on the left there you have bunkers, because having fought with his partisans in very well in the Second World War, Enver Hoxha decided to take that strategy of guerrilla warfare and build possibly up to 700,000 bunkers across Albania that people could be deployed into. And there are some remains of them there. So Albania is coming to terms with the past and what happened. And you can see in the middle an installation called Bunkart 2, which is in the passageways underneath the ministries in Tirana. As you can see, it's like a concrete bunker. And here are photographs of some of the many people who were killed by the regime, including quite a lot of priests, because religion was absolutely banned, it was Albania became an atheist state. Religion was forbidden.
Wow. So we're nearly out of time, Carolyn. So
we are out of time. So that's it. Modern Albania. There we are.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic. And that's Albania now, is it?
That's Albania. That's the football stadium on the right.
Right. Okay.
And on the left, that's the airport. And in the middle, you can see how Tirana, the capital, is being swallowed up by these huge skyscrapers. So the historic buildings are being swamped.
Okay, well, if you'd like to stop sharing your screen, that would be fantastic, because I would like to ask members of Monday Night Live to give you a vote of thanks in the normal Monday Night way for your spectacular and fantastic presentation. You are so knowledgeable, it's just not true. And we're all looking forward to our trip out to Albania. So that's absolutely fantastic. So if anybody wants to get hold of you that's watching this live or watching this on YouTube or the Negotiators podcast, how do they find you on LinkedIn, or have you got a website?
LinkedIn, I've got a blog, but I'm on social media, but LinkedIn's probably quite easy because I guess you are on LinkedIn. If not, my email is very easy. It's carolynmetkola@gmail.com. So exactly as my name is spelt, as you can see it now, carolynmetkola@gmail.com. I'm very, very happy to answer questions and give advice and recommendation to anybody who wants to visit the country.
Brilliant. Well, will you stay on and answer a few questions for us? But I just ask everybody to give you a vote of thanks in the normal way yet again. Thank you, Caroline. That was fantastic. Great job. Thank you so much. Right.